7:40 in the morning. The Strait of Hormuz. The aircraft carrier USS John C. Stennis was already in a hard starboard bank. This was not the planned course. 5,000 sailors felt the massive hull lean as 97,000 tons of steel carved through the turquoise water of the Persian Gulf. For weeks, the transit through these narrow waters had been publicized as a routine movement. The international maritime community had been given the exact coordinates of the carrier strike group for its passage. But 4 minutes ago, a flash message from the National Security Agency changed the mission. The question was no longer about a peaceful transit. The question was whether the carrier would survive the next 10 minutes. The morning air was thick with salt and humidity. High above the carrier, the sky was a pale, washed-out blue. On the flight deck, the yellow shirt crews stood frozen. They watched the wake of the ship curve sharply behind them. Usually, a carrier turns with a predictable, majestic grace. Today, the Stennis was moving with a desperate urgency. Escorting the carrier were 2 Arleigh Burke-class destroyers and a Ticonderoga-class cruiser. On the bridge of the cruiser, the commander watched his screens with growing concern. The Combat Information Center reported that the entire strike group was now 6 miles north of their original, published track. This was a violation of the agreed-upon transit corridor. It was a move that the Iranian Coast Guard would certainly interpret as a provocation. But the orders from the Pentagon were absolute. Deviate immediately. Do not explain. 60 miles to the north, on a jagged ridgeline overlooking the coast near Bandar Abbas, an Iranian radar technician stared at his console. He was part of a coastal defense battery. His equipment was Russian-made and highly capable. He saw the American carrier shift its heading. To his eyes, it looked like a tactical maneuver. He reported the change to his commander in a low, steady voice. In the nearby hardened bunker, a countdown had already reached its final phase. The Iranian commander did not care about the deviation. His orders were to conduct a pre-planned test of the Khalij Fars. It was a supersonic, anti-ship ballistic missile. The target coordinates had been programmed hours ago based on the American transit schedule. The missile did not have an active seeker head for this test. It was designed to fly to a specific point in the ocean and prove that Iranian industry could hit a moving target at long range. Inside the Combat Information Center of the Stennis, the atmosphere was different. The electronic warfare officers were detecting a sudden spike in high-frequency radar activity from the coast. The sensors identified it as a fire control radar. This was not a search pattern. This was a lock. The tactical action officer turned to the captain. His voice was calm, but his hand gripped the edge of the console. He reported that the Iranian battery had transitioned to an active state. On the primary display, a new icon appeared. It was a red triangle, moving upward at an impossible speed. It was not a cruise missile. It was something much faster. It was climbing through 30,000 feet and accelerating toward the edge of space. The crew of the Stennis braced themselves. They were now operating in the dark. Their sudden turn had moved them away from the predicted impact point, but they did not know by how much. They only knew that a 3-ton warhead was now arching over the horizon. The morning was still quiet. It would not stay that way. 7:46 in the morning. The Iranian coast near Bandar Abbas. A pillar of white smoke erupted from the hidden launch pad. The Khalij Fars anti-ship ballistic missile was already 500 meters in the air. Its solid-fuel rocket motor produced a low-frequency roar that rattled the windows of the command bunker 2 miles away. This was the moment the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps had practiced for months. The missile was a modified Fateh 110. It carried a high-explosive warhead and an electro-optical seeker. Today, the seeker was inactive. The mission was a demonstration of precision timing. Inside the Iranian bunker, the atmosphere was clinical. Technicians monitored green lines of telemetry on flat panel displays. An officer spoke into a headset. First stage ignition is stable. Tracking is active. The flight path is nominal. The Iranian commander nodded. He watched the digital representation of the missile as it arced south toward the Persian Gulf. To him, this was a mathematical exercise. He did not know that his target had moved. 7:48 in the morning. The Combat Information Center of the USS John C. Stennis. The blue glow of the consoles illuminated the faces of the crew. The tactical action officer stared at the primary air search radar. A bright red icon was climbing vertically on the screen. The Aegis combat system had already classified the contact as a short-range ballistic missile. A synthetic voice echoed through the room. Warning. Ballistic launch detected. Bearing 015. Speed is Mach 3 and increasing. The captain of the Stennis entered the room. He did not ask for a briefing. He could see the arc on the large screen display. Identify the escort response, the captain ordered. The tactical officer responded immediately. The destroyer USS Higgins has a track. They are requesting permission to engage with Standard Missile 3 interceptors. The captain paused. He looked at the clock. Wait. Look at the projected impact point. 7:50 in the morning. The edge of space. The missile was now 80 miles above the Earth. It had cleared the atmosphere. In the vacuum of the upper ionosphere, there was no sound. The first stage rocket motor burned out and fell away. The re-entry vehicle was now a silent, kinetic dart. It was traveling at 5,000 miles per hour. Inside the Iranian bunker, the technicians saw the separation. Stage 1 clear. Re-entry vehicle is on course, the technician reported. The Iranian commander smiled. On his screen, the missile was heading directly for the coordinates where the American carrier was supposed to be. Back in the Combat Information Center, the air was cold. The tactical officer adjusted the scale on his map. He pointed to a blinking yellow circle on the screen. It was several miles away from their current position. Sir, the officer said, the missile is not tracking us. It is tracking the old coordinates. The captain watched the red icon begin its descent. It was falling back toward the atmosphere. The trajectory was perfect. It was also perfectly wrong. The missile was committed. The ocean was waiting. 7:51 in the morning, 200 miles above the Earth. The space-based infrared system satellite detected the launch instantly. Its sensors captured the thermal bloom of the solid fuel motor as it punched through the lower atmosphere. The signature was unmistakable. It was a high-speed ballistic event. Within seconds, the data moved through the Defense Satellite Communication System at the speed of light. It reached the National Military Command Center at the Pentagon in Washington. The duty officer at the Pentagon stared at his console. A red alert flashed on his primary screen. It was a flash priority message. This was the highest level of emergency communication. The officer did not hesitate. He picked up the secure line to the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Sir, we have a confirmed ballistic launch from the Iranian coast. Trajectory is south-southwest. The target appears to be the Stennis strike group. The room went quiet. The air felt heavy. This was the scenario every analyst had feared. A direct attack on an American aircraft carrier in the narrow waters of the Gulf. Inside the Combat Information Center of the Higgins, the Aegis combat system was working at peak capacity. The SP-1 radar was locked onto the target as it reached the apex of its flight. The system was processing millions of calculations every second. It was measuring atmospheric density, gravitational pull, and the current velocity of the descending warhead. The weapon system supervisor adjusted his headset. Tracking is solid. We have a fire control solution. Requesting permission to engage with Standard Missile 3 interceptors. The destroyer captain looked at the display. He saw the red line of the Iranian missile and the blue dot representing the carrier. The two lines were not going to meet. Hold your fire, the captain ordered. Re-verify the impact point. Sir, the solution is confirmed, the supervisor responded. The missile is heading for the original transit coordinates. It is currently 3 miles off our stern and closing the distance at Mach 4. The captain wiped sweat from his upper lip. If we fire, we reveal our intercept capabilities. If we do not fire, we are betting 5,000 lives on a turn we made 6 minutes ago. 7:54 in the morning. The bridge of the USS John C. Stennis. The admiral stood by the window. He could not see the missile yet, but he knew it was there. It was a silent killer falling from the edge of space. He heard the reports from the Higgins over the open radio channel. The decision was his. He could order the strike group to defend itself and risk an all-out war. Or he could trust the intelligence that had told him to turn early. The admiral spoke into the command net. "All units, stand down. Do not engage. We will observe the impact." Inside the carrier, the crew was ordered to brace. Sailors sat on the deck in the hallways. They put their heads between their knees. They waited for a sound that might never come, or a sound that would be the last thing they ever heard. The missile was now entering the thickest part of the atmosphere. The friction was turning the nose cone into a white-hot torch. It was no longer a mathematical point on a screen. It was a physical reality. It was a 3-ton hammer falling toward the surface of the sea. 10 seconds to impact. 9, 8. The ocean was calm. The ship was leaning. The world seemed to stop moving. 7:55 in the morning. The Combat Information Center of the USS John C. Stennis. The digital clock on the bulkhead was the only thing moving. The Aegis display showed the Iranian missile passing through 100,000 feet. It was now in the terminal phase of its flight. The heat of re-entry had created a sheath of plasma around the warhead. This made it difficult for the Iranian ground stations to track it. But for the American SPY-1 radar, it was a beacon. The tactical action officer watched the projected impact point.
Analyze the trajectory from this point.
The square was static. It was not moving with the carrier. It was fixed to the original transit path that the strike group had filed with maritime authorities 48 hours ago. "The calculus is clear," the tactical officer said. He looked at the captain. "The missile is a blind shot. It is flying to a set of coordinates, not a target. It is aiming for where we were supposed to be. If we had not received the flash message from the National Security Agency, the warhead would be hitting our flight deck in less than 3 minutes." The captain stood behind the radar operators. He was a veteran of 2 decades in the Pacific and the Mediterranean. He knew that the margin for error in modern warfare was measured in seconds. 6 minutes, the captain whispered. That was the gap. If we had delayed the turn by 6 minutes, we would be in the kill zone. 7:56 in the morning. The Iranian command bunker near Bandar Abbas. The mood in the bunker had shifted from confidence to confusion. The radar technician at the coastal battery tapped his screen. He was looking at the live feed from a long-range drone circling over the Gulf. The drone was 10 miles away from the carrier. Its camera was zoomed in on the churning wake of the Stennis. "The target has deviated," the technician reported. His voice was higher now. "The American carrier is 5 miles north of the impact coordinates. It is continuing to move away at 30 knots. The Iranian commander stepped forward. He stared at the screen. He saw the carrier moving away from the invisible X in the water. He realized the problem immediately. The flight program for the missile was locked. It could not be updated mid-flight. The test was still a success from a technical standpoint. The missile would hit its target coordinates with high precision. But the target was no longer there. "Do we have a backup seeker?" the commander asked. "Negative," the technician replied. "The seeker is for Phase 2 of the test program. Today is a ballistic evaluation only. The missile will strike the water at the programmed location. 7:58 in the morning." The bridge of the USS John C. Stennis. The admiral stood on the wing of the bridge. He held a pair of high-powered binoculars. He looked toward the northern horizon. The air was clear. The visibility was excellent. He could see the escorting destroyers cutting through the waves. They looked small against the vastness of the Gulf. He heard the countdown over the bridge speakers. 30 seconds to impact. 30 seconds. The admiral did not move. He knew that the kinetic energy of a 3-ton warhead hitting the water at Mach 5 would create a massive shockwave. It would be like a small earthquake. He had ordered the crew to stay away from the windows. He stayed where he was. He wanted to see it. He wanted to understand the threat they were facing. 20 seconds. 20 seconds. The bridge crew was silent. Every man and woman was focused on their tasks, but their minds were on the sky. They were waiting for the atmospheric crack that would signal the arrival of the missile. They were waiting to see if the math was right. They were waiting to see if they were far enough away. 10 seconds. Mark. The admiral gripped the railing. He felt the vibration of the carrier's 4 massive propellers through the soles of his boots. The ship was pushing its engines to the limit. It was a race against a ghost. The sky above the horizon suddenly shimmered. A thin white line appeared. It was moving so fast that the human eye could barely track it. It was a finger of fire pointing straight at the surface of the sea. The morning was about to end. 7:59 in the morning. The upper atmosphere over the Persian Gulf. The Khalij Fars missile was no longer a ballistic object. It had become a meteor. As it slammed into the increasingly dense layers of the lower atmosphere, the friction generated temperatures exceeding 3,000 degrees. The nose cone glowed a brilliant, lethal white. At Mach 5, the air in front of the warhead could not move out of the way fast enough. It compressed into a superheated wall of plasma that trailed behind the missile like a jagged tail of fire. The missile was now less than 30 miles from the surface of the ocean. It was covering more than 1 mile every second. 7,000 miles away, in the windowless basement of the West Wing, the Situation Room was at maximum capacity. The National Security Advisor stood at the head of the mahogany table. He stared at a wall of monitors showing live telemetry from the Persian Gulf. A secure video link showed the commander of United States Central Command in Tampa, Florida. "The president is being briefed in the residence," the advisor said. His voice was flat. "General, give me a status update. Is this an intentional strike on the Stennis?" The general's image flickered on the screen. He was in his flight suit. "The trajectory is a direct hit on the carrier's previous position. If the Stennis had stayed on its published track, the impact would be occurring right now. We have 2 destroyers with a clear shot for an intercept. They are requesting permission to engage." "What is the risk of an intercept?" the advisor asked. "If we shoot down an Iranian missile over their own territorial waters, it is an act of war," the general replied. "If the missile is just a test and we let it fall, we avoid a regional conflict. But if we are wrong and that seeker head is active, we lose the carrier. We have 60 seconds to decide." The room went silent. The only sound was the hum of the air conditioning and the rhythmic tapping of a pen against the table. The advisor looked at the countdown clock. It was synchronized with the Aegis system on the Stennis. "Hold fire," the advisor said. "The admiral on the scene has the tactical lead. If he believes his ship is in danger, he shoots. Otherwise, we wait." 8 o'clock in the morning. The Combat Information Center of the USS John C. Stennis. The incoming alarm was a steady, pulsing tone that filled the room. It was not the frantic scream of a close-in weapon system. It was the measured, authoritative warning of a ballistic event. Every screen in the room was now dedicated to the descent of the Iranian warhead. The captain of the Stennis gripped the back of the tactical officer's chair. His knuckles were white. He was watching a blue dot his ship and a red dot the missile. The gap between them was 5 miles. In the world of ballistic missiles, 5 miles was a heartbeat. "Altitude, 20,000 feet, the tactical officer announced. "Speed is Mach 4.8. Angle of descent is 80 degrees. It is coming straight down." The captain looked at the fire control status. The USS Higgins was still holding its standard missile interceptors in the vertical launch cells. The software was screaming for a launch. The computer did not understand politics. It only understood that a threat was approaching the strike group. "Steady," the captain said. He was not talking to the crew. He was talking to himself. Inside the Iranian bunker, the commander was standing. He had lost the telemetry link as the missile entered the plasma phase. He was flying blind. He was staring at the drone feed, watching the empty patch of water where the carrier should have been. He knew that in a few seconds, he would know if his country had just started a war or simply made a point. The air over the Gulf began to crack. The sound was like a continuous roll of thunder that grew louder and sharper with every passing millisecond. The atmosphere was being torn apart by the passage of the warhead. The countdown hit 0. 8 o'clock and 30 seconds in the morning. The sky over the Persian Gulf. The sound arrived first. It was not a noise. It was a physical blow to the atmosphere. On the flight deck of the USS John C. Stennis, the air began to scream. A low-frequency vibration rattled the heavy chains, securing the F-18 fighters to the deck. It was the sound of a 3-ton warhead tearing through the air at 4 times the speed of sound. Inside the Combat Information Center, the electronic warfare sirens were at a constant, high-pitched wail. The tactical action officer gripped his console. Altitude 5,000 feet. Speed Mach 4.2. Target is terminal. The captain leaned into the microphone. All hands, brace for impact. Brace. 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 8 o'clock and 40 seconds in the morning. The destroyer, USS Higgins. The weapons supervisor had his finger on the firing stud for the Sea Sparrow missiles. His screen was a mess of red symbols. The Aegis combat system was practically begging to engage. "Sir, we have a solid track. We can take the shot. Permission to engage." The captain of the Higgins stared at the primary display. He saw the red line of the Iranian missile descending toward the empty ocean. He saw the blue dot of the carrier 6 miles away. Negative. Hold your fire. We are not the target. I say again, do not engage. "But sir," the supervisor shouted over the alarm, "the proximity is too close. The shockwave alone could damage the carrier's sensors." "Hold," the captain repeated. "That is an order." 8 o'clock and 50 seconds in the morning. The Iranian command bunker. The commander was leaning so close to the monitor that his breath fogged the glass. He was watching the drone feed. The camera was vibrating violently from the sonic boom of the passing missile. The patch of water was clear. The carrier was a distant gray shape on the edge of the frame. "Telemetry lost," the technician yelled. "We are in the blind." The commander did not move. He was a man made of stone. He knew that if the missile drifted even a fraction of a degree, it would strike the carrier. He knew that if it struck, his country would be at war before the sun reached its zenith. He watched the screen. He waited for the flash. 8 o'clock and 54 seconds in the morning. The bridge of the USS John C. Stennis. The admiral did not look at the screens. He looked out the window. He saw a shimmering distortion in the air. It was the re-entry vehicle. It was a white-hot needle moving faster than the human brain could process. It was a finger of fire pointed at the heart of his fleet. The air outside the bridge windows suddenly compressed. The pressure was so great that the thick glass groaned in its steel frames. The sound was no longer thunder. It was the sound of the world cracking open. Every sailor on the bridge held their breath. They were looking at the ocean. They were looking at the spot where they were supposed to be. 8 o'clock and 56 seconds in the morning. The Persian Gulf. The ocean's surface erupted. There was no explosion of chemical weapons or TNT. There was only the catastrophic release of kinetic energy, as 3 tons of metal and ceramic hit the water at Mach 4. The impact created a white flash so bright it was visible even in the harsh morning sun. A column of pulverized seawater shot 500 feet into the air. It looked like a solid white pillar standing on the horizon. A second later, the sound arrived at the USS John C. Stennis. It was a physical wall of pressure. The massive carrier shuddered. On the bridge, the admiral felt the deck plate beneath his feet jump. The sound was a sharp, metallic crack that seemed to echo through every compartment of the ship. It was the sound of the ocean being punched. The column of water began to collapse. It turned into a massive, circular wave that surged outward from the impact point. On the flight deck, sailors grabbed onto whatever was bolted down. They watched the white foam racing toward them. The wave hit the hull with a heavy thud, sending spray high over the catwalks. Inside the Iranian command bunker, the room was silent. The drone feed showed the massive splash. The technician adjusted the zoom on the camera. He measured the distance between the center of the splash and the current position of the American carrier. He looked at his commander. His face was pale. "Impact confirmed," the technician whispered. "The coordinates are a direct hit." The deviation of the missile from the programmed target was 0.04 degrees. "It is a perfect terminal solution." The Iranian commander stared at the screen. He saw the white pillar of water. Then he saw the gray hull of the Stennis, 6 miles away and moving fast. He realized the truth. The Americans had known the coordinates. They had not just guessed. They had moved with a surgical precision that made his missile look obsolete. They had known exactly where the impact was going to be before the missile even left the rail. On the bridge of the Stennis, the tactical officer was looking at his screen. He was overlaying their previous track with the coordinates of the splash. He looked at the captain. His hands were shaking. "Sir, I have the overlay. If we had stayed on our published transit course, if we had not made that turn 6 minutes ago, the captain looked at the clock. Where would the bridge have been? The tactical officer swallowed hard. The warhead would have struck the island. Exactly at the level of the bridge. The flight deck would have been severed. We would be at the bottom of the Gulf. The realization was a cold weight in the room. This was not a test that went wrong. It was a test that went perfectly. The Iranians had shown they could hit a carrier-sized target with ballistic accuracy at long range. The only reason 5,000 people were still alive was because of a single encrypted message from a windowless room in Maryland. The 6-minute gap was the difference between a routine morning and the start of World War III. The carrier continued its turn. It was moving toward the open sea, but the water behind it was no longer empty. It was filled with the debris of a new reality. The message from the coast was clear. The ocean was no longer a safe place for a carrier. Inside the Iranian bunker, the commander turned to his communications officer. Signal the Coast Guard. Tell them the test is complete. Tell them the results are being analyzed. Do not mention the American position. The commander knew the truth. They had missed their target. No, they had also proven that the target was within their reach. The morning was no longer quiet. The world was now a very different place. 8:00 to 6 in the morning. The Persian Gulf. The massive white plume of water had finally collapsed, leaving a ring of churning foam on the surface of the sea. The USS John C. Stennis continued its hard starboard turn, its hull vibrating from the sheer force of its engines. The strike group was now 5 miles away from the impact point and moving at 30 knots. Every radar and sensor on the ship was active, scanning the Iranian coast for a second launch. Inside the Combat Information Center, the silence was heavy. The tactical action officer checked the status of the escort ships. The destroyers USS Higgins and USS Gridley remained in a defensive formation, their missile cells ready to fire. There were no new contacts. The red triangle representing the Iranian missile had vanished from the screen. The admiral turned to his chief of staff. Damage report. I want to know if that shockwave knocked out any of our arrays. Sir, engineering reports no hull damage, the chief of staff replied. But the SP-1 radar on the Higgins took a massive surge of clutter from the splash. They are recalibrating now. We have full coverage from the E-2 Hawkeye overhead. We are still in the green. The admiral looked at the digital map. The yellow square marking the impact was exactly on the line of their original transit track. They did not miss, the admiral said quietly. They hit exactly what they were aiming at. They were aiming at a ghost. They were aiming at the version of us that was supposed to be there. 8:10 in the morning. The Iranian command bunker near Bandar Abbas. The Iranian commander stood with his hands behind his back. He was watching the replay of the launch on a secondary screen. Beside him, a senior intelligence officer was analyzing the movement of the American carrier. The digital playback showed the Stennis beginning its turn exactly 6 minutes before the missile reached its terminal phase. The timing is not a coincidence, the intelligence officer said. They did not move because they saw the launch. They moved before the ignition. Their intelligence knew our target coordinates before we even fueled the bird. The commander tightened his jaw. The coordinates were only shared on the secure internal network 3 hours ago. Even our own battery crews did not have the location until the final countdown. Either they have a deep asset in our command structure, the officer replied, or their signals intelligence is capable of breaking our newest encryption in real time. Either way, they knew. They moved just enough to stay safe, but not enough to suggest they were fleeing. It was a calculated display of superiority. The commander looked at the drone feed one last time. The American carrier was a sharp gray wedge cutting through the water. It looked untouchable. They humiliated us without firing a single shot, the commander said. They allowed the missile to hit the water to show us that they were not afraid, and to show us that our best weapons are hitting empty air. 8:15 in the morning. The captain watched the Iranian coastline through the bridge windows. The jagged mountains looked peaceful in the morning light. It was hard to believe that 10 minutes ago, a ballistic warhead had been screaming toward them from over the horizon. Signal Fleet Command, the captain ordered. Inform them that the transit is continuing. No damage to the strike group. We are maintaining a high readiness posture. Also, send a flash message to the National Security Agency. Tell them the 6-minute window was accurate. Tell them we owe them a debt. The ship began to level out as it completed its turn. The immediate crisis had passed, but the tension remained. The crew did not celebrate. There were no cheers on the flight deck. They all knew how close they had come to a different kind of morning. The carrier group was now 12 miles south of the impact zone. They were heading for the deep water of the Arabian Sea. Behind them, the patch of water where the missile had struck was starting to settle. The foam was dissipating. The ocean was reclaiming its secrets. The Iranian batteries on the coast were beginning to power down. Both sides were backing away from the edge. For now, the war remained a theory, but the math had changed forever. 10 o'clock in the morning, Fort Meade, Maryland. The windowless rooms of the National Security Agency were humming with activity. In a high-security vault, analysts from the Persian Gulf Task Force were comparing two sets of data. On the left, monitor was the intercepted Iranian target package sent to the missile battery 3 hours before launch. On the right was the actual GPS track of the USS John C. Stennis. A senior analyst pointed to the screen. The deviation occurred at 7:40 in the morning. That was exactly 6 minutes after we sent flash override to the strike group. If the admiral had waited for a second confirmation, or if the encryption had delayed the message by 360 seconds, the carrier would have been at the center of that splash. The room was silent as the implications sank in. The near miss was not a result of Iranian incompetence. It was a result of American foresight. The Iranian Khalij Fars missile had achieved a circular error probability of less than 10 meters. In the world of ballistic weaponry, that was a surgical strike. The missile had functioned perfectly. The only variable that failed was the assumption that the American carrier would follow its own rules. 1:30 in the afternoon, Tehran. The headquarters of the Revolutionary Guard Aerospace Force was in a state of quiet crisis. Senior officers sat around a long table, staring at a frozen frame of the drone footage. It showed the white geyser of water and the distant, unscathed American carrier. The Americans did not just evade the strike, a general said. His voice was low and heavy. They demonstrated that our secure communications are transparent to them. They moved the ship because they read our orders before our own battery commanders did. An intelligence officer shook his head. Or they have developed a predictive algorithm for our test cycles. Either way, the deterrent value of the Khalij Fars has been compromised. We showed them we can hit a coordinate. They showed us that the coordinate is irrelevant if they choose to be somewhere else. The debate turned to the technical aspects of the seeker head. If the missile had been equipped with its active radar seeker, would it have corrected its course in the final seconds? The engineers argued that, at Mach 5, the maneuverability of the re-entry vehicle was limited. Even with a seeker, the 6-minute gap might have been too large to overcome. The carrier had moved 5 miles. That was beyond the acquisition cone of the current generation of Iranian seekers. 4 o'clock in the afternoon. The Pentagon. In a secure briefing room, the Chief of Naval Operations stood before a map of the Strait of Hormuz. He was speaking to a group of high-ranking defense officials. The tension from the morning had transitioned into a cold, strategic assessment. The events of today mark a shift in naval warfare, the admiral stated. The Iranians have proven they can launch an anti-ship ballistic missile with terminal precision in a contested environment. This is no longer a theoretical threat. It is a functional reality. A civilian official leaned forward, but they missed by 6 miles. Admiral, why are we treating this as a game changer? The admiral looked the official in the eye. They missed because we cheated. We used national-level intelligence to break a DADBA, routine transit. We cannot do that every time a carrier moves through a choke point. We cannot live on a 6-minute margin. Today, we saved 5,000 lives because of a single intercepted message. Tomorrow, the Iranians will change their encryption. They will shorten their N% launch window. They will use multiple missiles. The admiral tapped the map. The carrier is still the most powerful tool in our inventory. No, Today, the ocean became a very small place. The age of the invulnerable capital ship ended at 8 o'clock this morning. The briefing continued into the evening. Orders were drafted to accelerate the deployment of directed energy weapons and more advanced electronic warfare suites to the Gulf. The game of cat and mouse had entered a new, more lethal phase. Both sides knew the truth. The next time, there might not be. A 6-minute warning. 2 days later, the Arabian Sea. The USS John C. Stennis moved through the deep, rhythmic swells of the open ocean. The narrow, claustrophobic waters of the Strait of Hormuz were now 300 miles behind them. On the flight deck, the routine of carrier aviation continued with professional precision. F-18 Super Hornets launched into the bright morning sky, their afterburners leaving white scars against the blue. To any observer, it looked like another day of American power projection. But inside the skin of the ship, everything had changed. The admiral sat in his sea cabin, staring at a single sheet of paper. It was a formal tactical memo from the Office of Naval Intelligence. The subject line was simple: the 6-minute gap. Across the fleet, that phrase was already becoming a part of military lore. It represented the narrow window of time that had separated a routine transit from a national catastrophe. Analysts had confirmed that the Iranian missile had struck water with a deviation of less than 20 meters from its intended target. If the carrier had followed its published schedule, the warhead would have impacted the ship's island. The command structure of the strike group would have been erased in a millisecond. The admiral stood up and walked to the small porthole. He watched the white foam of the carrier's wake. For 70 years, the aircraft carrier had been the ultimate symbol of sovereign strength. It was a floating airfield that commanded the horizon. But the events of 48 hours ago had proven that the horizon was no longer a shield. In the age of anti-ship ballistic missiles, the ocean had become transparent. The strategic assessment was clear. The Iranians had not failed. They had conducted a perfect kinetic test. They had proven that they could find, fix, and track a carrier moving through a restricted waterway. They had shown that they possessed the math and the hardware to kill a capital ship. The only thing they lacked was the element of surprise. In the Pentagon and in the halls of the National Security Agency, the debate was already shifting. The focus was no longer on how to defend the carrier, but on whether the carrier could be defended at all in such narrow waters. The 6-minute gap was a warning that could not be ignored. It was a metric of survival that relied on perfect intelligence. And in war, intelligence is never perfect. The admiral knew that the next time would be different. The Iranians would not use a single missile for a test. They would use a saturation strike. They would launch 20 or 30 airframes simultaneously, overwhelming the Aegis system through sheer numbers. They would use varying trajectories and decoys. And they would certainly change their encryption. The crew of the Stennis went about their duties with the quiet intensity of professionals who had looked into the abyss. They did not talk about the splash in the water. They did not talk about the turn, but they all felt the weight of the sky. Every time a radar swept the coast, every time a satellite passed overhead, they knew they were being watched. No missiles had been exchanged. No ships had been lost. There were no medals to be handed out for a battle that never happened. But history had shifted. The era of the carrier as an invulnerable asset was officially over. The balance of power in the Persian Gulf had been reset by a 3-ton dart falling from the edge of space. The admiral turned away from the window. He picked up his cap and prepared to head to the bridge. He had a mission to finish, but he knew the world he was returning to was not one he had left. The message from the coast had been received, and it was understood. The morning was bright, and the sea was vast. But for the 5,000 sailors on the Stennis, the ocean was no longer a hiding place.